Hello and welcome. I'm looking forward to my guest tonight. We're going to talk about a big topic. We're talking about kids and behavior issues. And some of you might say, well, that pretty much covers all kids and all kinds of issues, right? My guest is Rachelle Hansen. She is a clinical psychologist in private practice. She works with all kinds of ages, children, teenagers, families, adults, singly, and all together with their family. And she also works with neurodivergent kids, and I will have her define that because it's really not that complicated, but the title might throw you. So welcome, Rachelle.
Thanks for having me.
We've got a half hour to dig into this big topic. Before I forget, and before the audience says don't forget, neurodivergent kids or adults, that means, and how do you define it, just briefly?
So neurodevelopmental conditions are things that you're born with. So it might not arise until maybe you're a little bit later, but there's a whole section in the DSM-5, which is the big Bible of psychological and psychiatric disorders. And they added a new one in the fifth edition, or 5, being that they combined all of these conditions that happen, either you're born with them genetically or something turns on. It's called epigenetics. And these are things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD. Even schizophrenia can be considered a neurodevelopmental condition, but it might not maybe show up until those later years.
So the key idea is that they show up early then in life, very early?
I think the key idea is that it's part of your neural pathways, it's part of your neurocognitive, so the way your brain works, and it's something that you're born with. And it may be that things in your environment maybe turn up the volume of those differences, but that's what I think the kind of idea comes from. So development over time, so neurodevelopmental disorders.
Right, that makes sense. So really that includes an awful lot of us, doesn't it?
So this is why when people say, do you work with children or adults? I work with everyone because you don't outgrow a neurodevelopmental disorder, right? And so I get to see people across the lifespan. But I would say that those conditions look differently at different stages and ages.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then that adds to the need for families to really keep learning and talking to professionals, I'm guessing.
True. But they're a fantastic group to work with.
Yeah, I bet. Well, you're in private practice.
I am.
Tell us a little bit about your practice.
So I work at Stepping Stone Clinic. It's we see people across the lifespan. It's right where Minneapolis, Richfield, and Edina meet, right in the corner.
Okay.
And so I opened that up about 10 years ago after moving here to the cities to do my residency and my fellowship at Children's. And then I worked for Fairview for a little bit, Alina for a little bit, and then I started my own practice at Stepping Stone. I really wanted to have something that was integrating nutrition, occupational therapy, psychological assessments, neurodevelopmental assessments, and executive function coaching. So I couldn't find a system that would do that, so I thought I'd create one.
And you also have a unique kind of background in terms of your brain knowledge too, right?
Maybe. Well, I didn't start off, so I was a pre-med major. I graduated in biochemistry, molecular biology, and when it was time to go to medical school, I felt like that wasn't really speaking to me. It was more allopathic care, meaning disease-oriented, and I really wanted to look at behavior and lifestyle and those pieces. So I took some time, and I actually worked for the schools. I did some reading recovery. I worked for community mental. I actually worked for the court systems and protective care cases. So I was kind of all around, and then I decided I wanted to go back to school, and I received my clinical psychology degree and my master's and doctorate in clinical psychology with a specialty in neuropsychology and neurodevelopmental disorders. So,
are the people you work with the most, are they young people or are they or is it a whole range?
Whole range. I would say about 50% is my population is under the age of 18, and the other 50% are adults. So pretty evenly split.
Well, there have been some really tough things going on in our country and in our society here in Minnesota for young people, for kids. But we're going to talk about behavioral issues in a broad, kind of a broad sweep. But what are the most common behavioral issues that you run across and deal with?
So I would say that, well, I think first of all, we need to remember that behavior is a function of communication. So when we have a behavior, it's oftentimes trying to say something, or what else is going on. And children are exposed to all sorts of stressors. And so oftentimes they're the canary in the coal mine, right? So their behaviors are a representation of some of those stressors that they're exposed to. And when you think about stressors, we think about there's acute stress or even trauma, like abuse or violence, maybe death or a loss. And we think about chronic stressors, like maybe like bullying or maybe family discord or tension, or maybe school stress because this child's needs maybe aren't matching the resources of the school.
Just recently, most of you in Minnesota are aware we're taping now this fall, and most recently here in our state, we had a really tough and a well-known horrible incident in a school.
We did.
Where some kids were shot. And is this the kind of thing that reverberates way beyond the school, right?
Absolutely. That's called collective trauma. So when you're directly and not indirectly, when you're indirectly impacted by a community event like that, directly, of course, so our clinic is right there in that neighborhood. I actually live in that neighborhood. I was on my way to get a coffee at Starbucks when the first responders showed up, and by the time I got to the clinic, the phone was ringing off the hook of people talking about what had happened already. So both personally and professionally, I definitely have seen the impact in the community and also the resiliency of the community as well. And then how that's showing up in behaviors, but within the children that we work with, but also how that's showing up in school and things like that. There's something interesting about, maybe something that's different about children today, is I said there's some acute stressors or trauma, there's chronic stressors or trauma, but there's also what I would call ambient stress or trauma. And ambient meaning throughout and pervasive. So for example, there's really divisive rhetoric right now in our communities. There's threats all the time. These children were practicing school shooting drills. These children grew up doing that. So just the threat of that, the insecurity that maybe they felt during COVID about their health, and can that happen again, and can school be taken again? So there's this underlying current that us as providers, mental health providers, are definitely seeing that turn up the volume in the last couple of years.
How do you mostly or mainly see the kids reacting in terms of their behavior with this kind of sort of pervasive stress?
Well, so usually an acute stressor or acute trauma, first of all, let's talk about what trauma means. So trauma is something that happens that overwhelms the body and the brain and the coping mechanisms that are part of that individual. So we've outpaced the coping strategies or those instincts that are already in the body and the brain. And that's important to say that because you and I might respond differently to the same event. You and I might call something different what is trauma, and somebody else might not call that trauma, because it's really about how that person responds. So, and then also what coping skills they have in place or what community they have in place. So when we think about that, when we think about like what behaviors might show up, well, first of all, usually the children are a little bit slower to respond because they are looking to the adults to see how they're responding first. And adults tend to go into fight or flight action. They kind of go into this action. So after the enunciation experience, parents would tell me, I just went right into work mode. I got everything done. I needed to get it done, got everything, the child protected. They don't even remember. It's just kind of that adrenaline rush. And then they start to process. Then they start to cry. Then they start to break down. And so they go on to process that. And then they're starting to kind of get through that and working through that. And now they're a little bit more stable for their child, who now is looking to them. So it's interesting, when we look at stressful events and traumatic events, when someone is exposed to something that could be considered a trauma, only about, they say like 30 to 50% of people meet the criteria for acute stress disorder, which is like a pre-PTSD, within that first month of the event. So only 50%, I'm not trying to minimize that, that's a lot of people, but it also shows there's some resiliency in there.
Right.
And of those 30 to 50%, only 15 to 20% of them go on to develop full PTSD later on. So there's
that's
protective
the good
factors.
news,
That's the
isn't
good
it?
news, right?
Right.
So what makes those differences? A lot of it is how the adults around them respond. A lot of it's how the resources that are available.
So the kids look to the adults for modeling.
Absolutely. Not just modeling. Adults are used to co-regulate. So we're wired to regulate with each other.
Okay.
Yeah, Bruce Perry does a lot of this work. So he talks about the neurosequential model of regulation, meaning that our brains, the way we kind of respond to something, first, our most primitive brain needs to regulate first. Then the next part of our brain, which connects us with oxytocin and connecting us, that's our relation. And then we move to our prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of our brain, and that is what we do for reasoning. So we need to regulate first, then relate, then reason. But if you think about it, what do people normally do? They come to you with all of these solutions, fix. So here's my reason. They're reasoning with it. They're trying to reason this traumatic event. And then they hope that will connect them, relate them, and then they hope that will regulate them. But unfortunately, that's opposite to how our brain works. So the most important thing we can do is regulate ourselves first. Put your oxygen mask on first, right? Regulate yourself first. That will set the pace that your child will be attuned to you. Dan Siegel talks about this, attunement,
So if one parent does that and the other is kind of panicking, how does that end up working for the child?
Yeah. Well, the child's going to sense, where they are feeling more regulated and where they're not. And, it's important to, each parent might be processing differently. So it's important to give them those resources that they need.
Would the child automatically kind of look to the parent who's coping better, or is that not a
They might.
given?
But the child also might do some behaviors to help try to regulate the parent who's not coping well.
Oh. So
they
they
might,
would feel that little power that I better help my dad or my
correct,
mom here.
Correct. Or put their own needs apart, which,
Right.
that can maybe delay that process of them being able to take care of their own needs as well.
It gets very complicated
does.
very fast, doesn't it?
We're complicated
Right.
beings.
What are the main sort of things that we should look for when we have a child or a relative, a neighbor who is vulnerable? What kind of things show that they're in trouble?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I always like to start with our basic body functions. So, are we sleeping? Are we having nightmares? Are we eating? Are we taking care of our body?
Or overeating or undereating?
Correct.
Either
right?
one.
Or an appetite change. And then, are we moving? Like we can tell someone if they're having problems with depression, like by how they're moving, or anxiety by how they're moving. So we're looking at, are they overstimulated with their movements? Are they slowed? So I'm looking at those first. And then I'm looking at, are they sticking to the routines that they normally do? Are they able to do that? So and then I'm looking at, are they able to enjoy the things that they normally enjoy? So if they're withdrawing from things like that, that's important to pay attention to.
Now, when you are speaking of this, are you talking about children and adults? Both, right?
Both, yep.
Okay.
Now, children might not be as adept at expressing what's going on, but like I said, their behavior really does tell us what they're doing, right? So we can kind of see that. So, and you know, something interesting. Children thrive on routine. We all do, actually. It makes us feel good.
Sure.
When I worked in the oncology ward at a children's hospital and worked with cancer patients, you know, here this child would receive this huge diagnosis, right? And of course, they maybe
and the
didn't
family
understand.
often was, I worked at Children's for 14 years.
There you go.
So often the family was having a harder time on the outside, at least, than the child.
You're right. You're right. Partially because maybe the child didn't understand what was going on, right? But then I would have like my private session with them, see how they were doing. And you want to know the things that they would be the most upset about? It wasn't always about the ports or the medication or that their parents, it was something's not right because I can have ice cream for breakfast and I'm allowed to play video games and I don't have to go to bed and I'm missing school, right? That's what they were upset, the routine, the things that they were used to doing.
So they would feel upset about that, but not happy upset?
Well, upset, like they didn't feel right, like their routine was off.
This is foreign.
Yep, right, and then that would concern them and that would make them feel like their security and their stability was...
This is not normal.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So, it's, parents would say, oh, I don't want to, I want to give them some extra cushion, and there's a balance in that, of course, but routine's important.
Should we, as parents or grandparents or good friends, should we work really hard to cover our feelings up and present ourselves as we're in charge, you don't have to be, to the child?
That's such a good question. The answer is no. So
that's kind of what I thought.
What you want to do is you want to name your feeling so they see that.
So they're...
Show them what you're doing to address that feeling and show them that it's okay. Feelings are normal. Feelings are part of being a human. And then you can model to them what you do to address that and then encourage them to as well. That's what Dan Siegel calls mindsight. Mindsight is your ability to feel, name an emotion, express that, right? So we've kind of validated it to the child, like, see, I get angry, I'm sad, I'm scared, and this is what I do,
Do kids kind of automatically do that you've worked with or families you've worked with? Or is that something that comes sort of gradually with more input from a professional or a parent who's already really comfortable?
So do kids automatically be able to recognize emotions and express them? And well, Mary, the human species has been around long before psychologists have been around, so I'm not going to pretend that we're essential for that process. But I also think that when you have a kid, you get a dentist, a pediatrician, and a mental health provider, a psychologist, because those takes care of all parts of the brain, all parts of the body.
Ideally,
yep. So you asked a good question. Do they do that automatically? Well, we talked about behaviors. I mean, we're good at communicating things through our behaviors. And I think that children want that connection, and it feels really good to be validated and to be given the language to be able to express what's going on internally for them. And, I said how I worked with the neurodivergent population. I think that's why they're more at risk for trauma and more at risk for how to handle those stressors. In fact, 2 to 3 times more, some statistics show.
Oh, that's a big difference.
And I think it's for a couple reasons. One, their own neuroprocessing, their own sensory system kind of amplifies and intensifies those experiences for them. Because remember, trauma is really about like how you respond to it, not the event itself. And then oftentimes maybe they misinterpret cues or misinterpret things in their world.
Do kids or adults kind of jump to the catastrophizing sooner than they should?
It depends on the person.
Okay.
Some people are good what-ifers, and other people are kind of clueless sometimes, or maybe even numb to it, or have an experience where they don't feel themselves. They've kind of out of body, or what's called depersonalization. So I think, with the neurodivergent population, they sometimes are misinterpret those pieces, but also sometimes they're misunderstood. So maybe their verbal abilities aren't as good, so they're acting out behaviorally, or they're stimming or trying to calm themselves, and that's being distracting. So I think
So a lot of extra challenges. You brought, and we only have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
You brought some books that look excellent. Can you
made
hold
me,
each one up
you
and
made
then
me.
just say a couple sentences at the most, and then if we have more time, we'll come back.
You should never ask somebody who loves books to bring just one book. So
Good.
Here's Dan Siegel's book. So this is Interconnected.
If you just hold it real straight, the camera can zoom in.
Yep.
So Interconnected.
And this is Dan Siegel. So Dan
Me
Siegel.
and We.
Yep. He also wrote The Whole Brain Child.
Right. He's well known, isn't he?
And he wrote Parenting from the Inside Out with Mary
that's right.
Hartzell. So
Right.
And Tina.
So this is, though, quite kind of a study, kind of a guidebook, right?
This is about how you integrate that mindset, that being able to tell what we're feeling and then what somebody else is feeling, and then attune to that. So being attuned. So that, because once we're attuned, then we can go ahead and address that together and co-regulate together. Yep.
And then you have.
And then I brought, this one's a little bit of a more, this one's kind of technical. This one's Bruce Perry, and he wrote it with Oprah Winfrey. Now, Bruce Perry is the one who talks about the neurosequential model, that regulate, relate, then reason. And then I always like to add another R, which is routine. So regulate, relate, reason, routine.
Oh, that's a good extra R.
Yeah. So this one's a little bit, it's a hard read because it talks about stories, but it's of different people.
Some tough stories, right?
But I love how he does this. So he picked this word, what happened to you, because in the hospitals it's oftentimes, what's wrong with that kid?
Okay.
What's wrong with that person? And he said, no. What happened to that child? What happened to that person? A better way.
Oh, that's a much better way. And then you've got a couple
Oh,
books
I
for kids.
got some for kids. Yep. So here is.
We've got only 3 minutes left.
Right.
So
here's a book called A Terrible Thing Happened, and it's a great way. I use books all the time, bibliotherapy, to kind of talk to people about things without doing it directly.
That's a great cover. Does this connect at all to the author of It's a Terrible, Horrible, Awful? No, that was Judith Fiers.
That's right, but it's the same
Awful
thing.
Day.
Yeah,
but
same idea.
Similar.
Same idea.
Gets you in that similar
I
mood,
love books.
doesn't it?
I use books in my practice all the time because then they don't have to talk about it directly. They can relate it through the character.
Right.
And
then
my
one
last
more here.
one, Patrice Karst, The Invisible String, which talks really about the importance of community.
Oh,
So,
I love the title.
Yeah.
I can kind of extrapolate from it, right?
Yep. Great books for kids.
Well, gosh, I love those resources. If people want to get a hold of you, how do we best do that?
Well, you can look us up. So I have both a clinic and an executive function center. So we have clinicians at Stepping Stone Clinic, and I'm assuming we're going to share the website, maybe?
Yes, we will.
Yep, and then Life Effects is the executive function coaching branch of Stepping Stone Clinic too.
So you've got really 2 different hats you wear.
Yep.
At least 2.
Yep. We also have a little nonprofit on the side that helps people who maybe can't afford some of those services that insurance doesn't cover, called the Life Effects Project. So we're busy.
Yeah, okay, good. And you're located out in?
It's technically Richfield, but it's right where Edina and Minneapolis and Richfield kind of come together.
Well, thank you so much for coming down. I have been talking, as you, I hope know, to Rachelle Hansen, and she's a psychologist in private practice here in the Twin Cities.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you so much for coming down. I love the resources. I love your approach. And I think all families and all kids are kind of looking for something extra right now to get us through this tough year. So,
Well, hopefully this helps people.
yeah, it will help.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.